become probably the most used search technology out there. Largely due, I believe, to the fact that it was an open source project. So I was inspired by that. That was a real a way to get technology out there effectively and efficiently, was to give it away. And I, was able to do consulting work around Lucene, and never missed a mortgage payment. Had married with kids, and without giving software away, it actually worked. So a few years later, I started working on trying to build a full web search engine. Pretty ambitious project. We called this Nudge. Probably started in 2002, something like that. I'd worked on web search before, and so we built this up as a distributed system. Got it running on 5 machines at first that we'd scrounged up, 5 PCs, and could crawl at a decent rate. But it was a manual process to run all these steps. It ran on 5 computers in parallel. But you had to copy files between them at various things, and you had to have this whole sequence of things. And basically, only I knew how to run it. And I've written some directions and some scripts and so on. But it was operationally intensive. It wasn't sort of turnkey. Which is the way I'd worked on web search engines before in the 90s. But then Google published a couple papers in, I think it was 02, 03, or 03, 04. One was about the Google file system, a way of spreading data across a bunch of PCs and making it look like one file system, but done in a way that was tolerant of failures, so that if one machine went down, you had replicas of the data, and you would seamlessly just be able to keep reading and writing data and never even know that node had gone down. You just lose a little bit of file system capacity. Very nice design. It was also pretty simple. You could read the paper and get your head around and say, that's a nice piece of design. We could implement that. Then a year later, they published another thing about a way to do batch processing across the same kind of set of machines with a bunch of hard drives on them, and with the same property of if one of the machines crashes, your computation isn't lost. You only lose a little bit of it, and you can restart that one part, and everything else will keep running. Together, these were directly applicable to what I was doing on Nudge. And they would solve this problem I had of trying to develop this thing at the same time as operate it. I could spend a week running the crawler. I could spend a week developing, but either one was a full-time job. And if you could automate it, then I could spend more time developing. So there was an immediate personal advantage to these methods. But moreover, from my experience with Lucene in open source, I felt like this was something that a lot of people would probably find useful. Now I was mostly thinking about people building search engines like me, which there were a lot, but they were a handful around the world, and that it would be useful to them. And if we had an open source solution, then everybody wouldn't have to reinvent it. We could all share this one implementation, and it might actually be a reasonably popular open source project. A lot of people might use it. So I started to add these capabilities that Google described to Nudge. And this was together with a guy named Mike Caffarella. He was my collaborator in those years. By 2005, we had it running on 20 machines. I was working part-time at the Internet Archive, probably heard of the Internet Archive. They had some machines that they would loan me to test this on and run some crawls and see how well the distributed stuff worked. Mike was a grad student at the University of Washington, and he had some research projects where he could try it. And we both had about 20 node clusters that we could experiment with, and we had it kind of up and stumbling. That's what I call it. It wasn't terribly reliable, and we didn't know how far it would scale. Probably not any further than the 20 machines without falling down, because we'd never tried it on anything bigger. At that point, I was a little frustrated because I realized it had a lot of potential. These concepts and the combination of open source and these ideas that Google had described, but that Mike and I, working part-time on borrowed hardware, probably weren't going to get to the point where we delivered something that really gave you this turnkey ability to just add more hardware, add more data, and go with it, and have this really reliable computing platform. And so I decided to look for a real job instead of just doing consulting work. I was also tired of paying for my health benefits out of pocket.
And that was only getting your warrant.
So I looked around. I talked to IBM, and they were interested in hiring me to work on Lucene, and I wasn't interested in working on Lucene. It was on a good, healthy path. A lot of people contributing to it. And so I said, no, thank you. And then I talked to Yahoo, and Yahoo said, we're really interested in this stuff. We've got a web search engine, and the way we're scaling its back end is not going well. We need some new technology, and we think open source would be a neat thing for Yahoo to get involved with. We've never really been involved with that. So I joined Yahoo, January 2006. We took these distributed computing parts of Nutch and put them in a new project. Yahoo didn't want to contribute to a search project because they had a lot of patents in the search area, and they were worried that they could lose control of their patents, so they said, you got to split it out, which made sense anyway, functionally. And I had a name that I'd been saving around for a few years that my son had made up for his stuffed yellow elephant, this crazy word, Hadoop. And I was like, it came time to split it out. I was like, I got a name, and everybody's like, no, we got it. And we had a little discussion, and I managed to somehow convince people that was the good name for the project. So I guess it was early 2006. We split Hadoop into a separate project. Had this team from Yahoo who started really contributing to it. On day one, I think that I started Yahoo, we had a 200 node cluster to develop on. And by the end of the year, we had a couple of thousand node clusters that were up and running, that had operators to keep them up and running. We chased down, the vast majority of the little bugs that only show up in distributed systems, running for a long time. Really in 07, I think we hit that potential of having something that was open source, which would let you use affordable commodity hardware to scale linearly and store and process petabytes. It was a game changer, and people started to notice it and use it. We crossed this threshold. Yahoo used it for all of its web search, starting around that time. We set a new record for the number of, the amount of time you could sort a terabyte in. It took a lot of hardware. It wasn't necessarily the most efficient solution, but we did set a new record. Folks at Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter started to pick this stuff up. Started to get to be a growing community of people contributing to the open source project. It wasn't initially, originally it was Mike and I and a couple other people, and now we had this team from Yahoo, and then it started to really get a lot of breadth to the open source community around it. People started to add more things on top. If we fast forward to today, we've seen this ecosystem of projects build up around Hadoop. I think Hadoop just sort of happened at the right time, and I was obviously the right guy, because I had the problem facing me. I had this experience of not ever being somebody who believed that in solving problems with relational tools, because they never worked for the problems I was interested in. So I was comfortable in just sort of starting from scratch, which was what this entailed, what it required. And I had the experience with open source. I was able to see the power of that to help something advance. But now what that's given us, which was not my design at all, but I'm tremendously pleased to see, is this whole array of projects around Hadoop that provide you with this wide variety of kinds of computation you can do. We've got a variety of SQL engines, so you can do SQL queries and that everybody's knows and loves from their years of experience with it. You can do search engine things like with Lucene and Solar and Elasticsearch. You can do graph analytics. You can do predictive analytics. This is growing suite, streaming real-time online processing, NoSQL stores, very large key value stores. So it's actually become a superset of the capabilities that you had in a traditional enterprise technology at a fraction of the cost, and with also some new benefits of that you can, once you have a variety of tools together on one platform, at a low cost, you can afford to store more kinds of data in their raw form, which lets you explore your data and discover new applications. And we saw this at Yahoo. Google has seen this as you initially build a cluster to solve some big problem you have, saving you money. You got a clear reason why you need to do this, but then you start. Somebody says, "Hey, I got this idea. I wonder now since we have this thing and all these data sources together, let's try this." And you discover all these new applications and new uses of your data. And Yahoo within actually before we even did the search had 3 or 4 successes that they hadn't planned for. They wouldn't have built this resource for them. Improve spell checker and search suggester and way of deciding how to place and order ads on a page. All these things that they could quantitatively evaluate things that they hadn't been able to before, and really back them with data. So it's you've got this ecosystem that's not controlled by any one party. That's really evolves freely in the way that the community, the way that the users like, in the way that people find valuable. You've got folks like grad students at Berkeley writing projects which they think are a good idea, and then the entire community of people who are out there who are deploying these systems across all kinds of industries can decide whether that's useful.